which is what we want to start this conversation on. Look, how do you think the war's going and how do you foresee it ending?
How you foresee it ending is another question entirely. How the war's going, OK, it's going badly for the Russians, but the idea that the Russians have lost is not true, and we're buying into the idea of Russian defeat too early. Russia still occupies 20% of Ukraine, and if they keep occupying that for the next year or two, then actually Putin is winning. So the idea that Putin's lost this war, I don't buy. And actually, if Putin's agenda is to create a Russia which is viscerally hostile and angry and full of hatred towards the West, and to reshape Russian identity to be profoundly anti-Western, he's sort of doing quite well in Russia. Yes. Now, that may all come crashing down. His regime may come crashing down, but it hasn't yet. When it comes to arming the Ukrainians, we've got to continue to do so. But the big sort of collapse of the Russian front, especially in the south, it may not happen because the Russians are dug in so many different lines that it's going to be very difficult to break through all those lines. Although the Ukrainians, you know, they've got the motivation, they've got the morale. They're much better now at doing maneuver warfare, which is effectively modern warfare where you combine stuff. So they're going to do well this summer, I hope. How well is the great question.
You say they've got the motivation and indeed they've got the spirit, but do they have the weaponry? Has the EU or EU countries been found wanting in supplying weapons to Ukraine?
Probably yes, because the Americans, look, we're doing lots of great stuff there and we led the way, and actually congratulations to the previous Boris government and to Rishi's government. But it's the Americans that are supplying about 85% of the kit. And considering the European Union's economic size, our ability to support the Ukrainians, I think, has been pretty poor. I mean, when I say our, I'm talking about Europe as a whole. I think we've been pretty good. The Americans have been pretty good. But I think Europe's been lacking, and everything has taken time to come out, and it's way too slow.
I wonder what you made of James Cleverley, the Foreign Secretary, tweeting in the week that Ukraine's rightful place is in NATO. Do you agree with that?
Up to a point. I just, for me, this could escalate in a much more dangerous way, this war, whether it's attacking Western pipelines or 70 internet cables or the 5 interconnectors, the electricity supply lines between us and Europe. And
do you think that's a really credible threat?
For sure, yes, I do. And I also think we underestimate the potential for Russia to use tactical nuclear weapons. I did a study for the Heritage Institute a few months ago, and there was a recent study put out by a retired US general that says actually the likelihood of using this is higher than we think.
Really?
Yeah, I mean...
That's horrifying.
It is horrifying. On the balance of probabilities, the Russians probably won't do it because of the Chinese and the Indians would effectively withdraw their support significantly. But if Putin always escalates out of a crisis, how is he going to escalate out of this crisis apart from another round of mobilization and more artillery and more strikes on Kiev and other Ukrainian cities, which isn't working?
Was Cleverley naive to make this statement then?
I think we should park NATO membership. Ukraine is safe, not when it becomes a paper member of an organisation, but actually when it's got the ability to defend itself, whether it's got the kit, when it's got the kit to defend itself, and when it's got the military intellectual firepower to use that kit in the most effective way possible, which it is learning.
I mean,
but that is when it's going to be safe.
The severing of undersea cables, just to explain to the viewership and the listenership, you know, these are cables which carry all of our data. I mean, the entire country is completely disabled.
Yeah.
And I know there has been some evidence of some degree of attempts to tamper, but just tell us about the threat of that particularly.
For sure. There are 70 comms cables between us, Europe and North America and elsewhere in the world. There are 3 gas supply lines, one from Norway, which is a critical one, and there are 5 electricity interconnectors. If these are sabotage, and we're never going to... The idea that we're going to know it's the Russians who've done it, I think is going to be really difficult. And you cannot go to war. You cannot say that we would have a military response to this without being so sure it was the Russians. And you can suspect it, but unless you've got that proof, no government is going to take military action or decisive action against the Russians should our supply lines be cut. But if any of those 70 cables are cut, we will start noticing it. The City of London will start noticing it. The City of London will say we can't operate.
But do we have the capacity, by the way,
we don't
to take any military action against Russia, even if we wanted to?
We do, but I mean, in the great scheme of things, would you want to be doing that? No. You may want to up your support to Ukraine still further. You may then want to supply either Swedish Gripen planes or F-16s. But again, you're getting into increasingly dangerous territory. Our problem is we won't be able to find it because we've got one ship that is specialising in defending undersea cables, and it's not yet been commissioned.
One ship?
Yeah. We may have 2. It's being commissioned at the moment, and there's talk about getting a second one. No, we have subs and we have vessels that can do that. I mean, this is the problem with our defence spending, is that there's no redundancy in the system, and we live in much more dangerous times, and that's been increasingly clear over the last 10 years.
What share of GDP should defence spending be? I know Truss advocated 3%. Would you advocate more?
I would advocate more than we're doing at the moment, but it's not a question of how much money, because you can spend that money very badly, as we know, on procurement, where, it's still a national scandal. I mean, some of our kit is billions over budget and still doesn't work and gives you sort of backache and hearing problems if you're using it.
Doesn't give the electorate much confidence, any of this, Bob?
No, it's not great. I mean, look, the procurement in the MOD has been a scandal for years, and to Ben Wallace's credit, he is now trying to solve this. But this stuff is now being...
Should Ben Wallace move and be the head of NATO with all of this happening on home soil and concerns about our own defences?
I think Ben Wallace would be a great head of NATO. I think he's highly capable, and if there's somebody who deserves that job, who we know would do it very well, I think it is absolutely Ben Wallace.
And you could then replace him as Defence Secretary.
Well, that's very kind, very unlikely.
Let's move on to other matters. You saw the scoop in the Telegraph on Saturday about this counter-disinformation unit effectively spying on lockdown critics. We've got one coming in later, Molly Kingsley. This is almost sort of Soviet-style Stasi techniques of spying on people who dissented and didn't think that schools should be closed or didn't wear face masks. They're not conspiracy theorists, are they, Bob? Why were they being spied on?
And the problem is there is a conspiracy theorist fringe. I don't buy their arguments in any way, shape or form. But there was a role for intelligent debate, and there was a role for listening to different experts during COVID. And what has really depressed me about this was the way that the government, and it's a government I was supporting, which is even more frustrating. You'd expect it from Labour. You shouldn't expect this thing from the Conservatives. We had a government that effectively was very hostile to dissent and was saying it was listening to experts, but the only experts it was listening to were people who effectively, like from Imperial College, who were producing extraordinarily questionable data, which has since, if my understand...
data.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, if I'm ever a minister during a crisis, my first instinct is not to listen to anything put out by Imperial College.
Should Baroness Hallett look at all this as well as everything else?
Look, the problem with Baroness Hallett, I just think the inquiry is going to cost about $250 million and is going to achieve absolutely nothing. The Swedes have already delivered their inquiry.
Is this inquiry just taking too long? We might not hear back from her. She said she needs another 3 years to assess all the data.
3 years, and by then I can guarantee we won't have learnt the lesson. The big lesson is, the big question for me is not why didn't we go into lockdown earlier? The big question is why did we experiment with lockdown in the first place?
Or why did we engage in mass groupthink rather than...
Absolutely, and it's maybe because China locked down, maybe because Italy locked down, maybe because we were spooked by the highly questionable Imperial College stats that came out, which are now being, as I say, being significantly questioned as to their likely accuracy. We had a pandemic response model. It's what the Swedes did. OK? It costs them a lot less, but even more importantly, we have now got, between 10 and 20,000 excess deaths
2020
every year.
We have been more Swedish.
Yes, we should. And, I say that as someone who voted for the first couple of lockdowns and became sceptical, frankly, too late in the day.
We've only got a minute left, Bob. Let's have a chat about the Tories. Can they win in 2024?
Yes, we can.
People talking about Boris still on the doorstep?
No, they're not. I was out in a place called Wootton Creek yesterday. There's a lovely patch in the Isle of Wight, and people are not talking about Boris. I know the Westminster media love to talk about him. The folks on the doorstep, they've moved on.
Do they want taxes to be cut? Do you want taxes to be cut?
Yes, they do. And what we need is a Conservative government which is in line with the British people. They think that political correctness, they don't like it. They want us to be proud of our history. They want us to deliver tax cuts and job creation, and they want us to train up people here rather than relying on...
So more right-wing Toryism or left-wing Toryism?
I'd say more conservative Toryism.
More conservative conservatism?
Yeah.
We love that, Bob. Thank you very much indeed. Lovely to see you this morning. Thank you very, very much for joining me. Now, lots more to come on